is Fidelma, and I have lived in the north for the last 30 years. But I grew up in Cavan, and I've been with my partner Eileen now for 19 years. It's something that's become more important. Maybe it's an age thing. Certainly when I was growing up, it was part of my life. I grew up in the Catholic tradition. It was very much part of going to Mass, going to confession, going to a convent school. And the majority, actually, I don't think I really knew any Protestants growing up at all. Everything, youth club was in the church hall, and it was just a predominantly Catholic town. So I saw the Catholic tradition and faith then was something that was part of the rhythm of life in terms of how you engaged with the world, without any real, I don't think, theological understanding or really interrogation of it. I mean, I've said that growing up in an Irish Catholic family, we of course had a Bible in the house, and growing up in an Irish Catholic family, of course, we never read it. And I think that's been very different from developing a lot of friends who are Protestant, come from various Protestant traditions, where the Bible was very, very important. It's a very integral part of their youth. So I suppose faith now, it's something I'm trying to re-engage with after a long time of feeling that it wasn't for me, that it didn't welcome me, that because I came out as gay, and the church said that was wrong, and the church's position on women very much alienated me. So I disengaged, so very, very consciously disengaged, probably for about 20 years. Yeah, because when I came up here to university, I was still involved. We had a lovely priest, Father Brian Mullen, who was the university chaplain at the time, and he was a lovely, kindly man. And I went to Mass, and I was involved, in the Catholic chaplaincy, when I was in university. But I also at that time started reading things like feminism. I started, I suppose, becoming more aware of things that outside my small town where I grew up. I came out, which I think, first of all, to myself, which was, quite challenging for myself, and then started to come out to other people. And so I became much more aware of the church's position then on gay people, which was Pope John Paul. He said some pretty homophobic things deliberately in that he was articulating the view of the church, which I really hadn't heard of as a teenager. I had never tuned into, I had never noticed. But also the church's position on women. Also, I was thinking, I was a woman, and here was a church that was supposed to be something I belonged to, saying actually you can only belong up to this point. And I think really my growing awareness of feminism and rights generally thought, well, that's not something I want to give my energy to. It's not something I want to be part of. Instead, in fact, I don't need it. And if I don't need the church, then I don't need God, because God and the church for me were completely interlinked. So when you give up one, then you automatically give up the other. For me, it's a learning experience, and I think, I suppose, what brought me back a number of years ago was a friend of mine who was gay and came from the Presbyterian tradition, had re-engaged with her faith and started talking to me about it, and I thought, what are you on? I just thought, what? I don't get it. I don't get why this is important to you. I don't understand why, as a gay woman, suddenly you want to engage with something that's been so hostile. But I think what it made me do, and I had a number of conversations with her, and she, I suppose, like someone who had re-engaged, was very vociferous and has kind of jumped in with both feet and was really enthusiastic, and I was kind of going, this is not the person I know. But I was interested because it met a need in her. It really, she felt that it was important for her, and I was interested to find out why it was important for her and what difference it had made to her. But we had many theological arguments, in terms of, well, I think it's all rubbish kind of position. But what it did for me was it kind of got me thinking, well, what do I actually believe? At that point in my mid-40s, what do I believe? And I suppose that for me started me thinking, and it probably coincided around the same time with a number of people who I also kind of had come into my life through work and different ways, who were people of faith and also people committed very much to equality. And again, I couldn't understand how you could be both. How could you say you're a Christian, particularly in the Protestant domination, which I always perceived to be more fundamentalist, and still committed to equality? How can you square that circle? So again, conversations with them I found really interesting, and I was genuinely interested in it. And at that time I would have promoted the likes of the Pride service, but I never would have gone because it would have felt hypocritical to go. But I would have been really felt it was important for people who to not be denied access to realms or spheres just because of their sexual orientation or their gender identity. So whether that was schools, employment, particular access to services or social spaces, I didn't believe that anybody, and campaigned very actively, that nobody should be denied from those spaces just because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. So I suppose I saw church in that way, but I couldn't understand why anybody would want to be involved in church. But that was, I suppose, the journey for me in terms of that maybe, not that there something in this, but how are people squaring the circle? So I was almost interested from an intellectual point of view in terms of how people were able to hold both positions and seem comfortable, and both positions were important to them. So I started doing some reading around it, and I read probably maybe some more progressive people, which again, so I started to see a bit of a chink in that these are people who are committed to social justice, and part of that commitment is also because of their faith. And I found that interesting, but again, probably I didn't engage in the theology of it, but some of the things that I'd read were debunking some of the myths and stereotypes that I'd heard. Because I think a key thing for me was growing or living in Northern Ireland was every time I turned on the radio and somebody came on the radio on a radio show and said, as a Christian, inevitably, they would say something I disagreed with, because it would be homophobic or transphobic or sectarian or bigoted or misogynistic. So my perception of Christianity were those voices on the radio. And those voices on the radio tended to be coming from that polarised position, because the reason we're on the radio was to come from that polarised position. So that was the discourse in the public. That was the public discourse that I was hearing. And all that did was just reaffirm for me that religion is rubbish, and religion is homophobic, and religion doesn't want me to be included, so why would I want to be included? So to starting to hear other voices, people articulating a position of faith and also holding a position where they were committed to equality and LGBT equality, then I was interested in how they held that position. But also, I suppose, when I was reading, I read The God Delusion. And it was an interesting book, and I'd also read The Shack, and I'd read Dave Tomlinson and Morgan Guyton and different readers, and Craig Grenfield, who was very much around social justice. So I was making the link between it and social justice. But because I'd read The God Delusion, my friend was, I think, horrified that I'd read The God Delusion, and she challenged me to read the Gospel, which, and I like a challenge. So I did. I read the entire New Testament, end to end. And I suppose coming to it as an adult, and never having read it really as a young person, but have been exposed to it at Mass and school, but in segments, not in its entirety, I think what I realised was the amount of social justice in it. And I think that's what was new for me when I started looking at I suppose, religion and the Christian religion was, hang on a minute, I don't remember the emphasis on social justice. I don't remember this emphasis. All I remember was the emphasis on sexual morality, on deviancy, and I'm committed to social justice as a person, and in terms of how I want to be in the world, it's about what the contribution that I want to make to the world. So I suppose I was suddenly seeing in the narrative of the Gospels that commitment and that challenge within the Gospels to the people who also pretended to be, committed to social justice, but actually been called out by Jesus and by the Christian narrative. And I think that's what attracted me. But I still couldn't get with Christianity, because the block for me was this moral superiority that Christians had in relation to other religions and other faiths. So the attitude was, Christianity is one true faith. The only way to God is through Christianity. And some of my friends would have held that position to some degree. And I said, well, actually, I have friends who are Muslim, and there's no way I'm signing up to something that by signing up to it, I am saying I'm better than you. I've got it sorted, and I've got access to something that you don't have access to, because that's not where a space that I would want to hold or identify as or name in that way or be associated with. So while I think when my deliberations in terms of where I want, what I really thought, I decided to believe that there was a God. I thought, yeah, okay, I believe there's a God. I have no idea what that really means. and I was trying to find a way of engaging with God. And Christianity wasn't necessarily my first choice because of this superior kind of attitude and this hierarchy of religions of which Christianity felt it was at the top. You know? So I think that was really the struggle I had, was around that superiority of Christianity, and you had to commit to the one true God, and Christianity, you know, it was the only way. And I suppose then I started having conversations, I guess, with some people of faith, and kind of, well, how do you hold that position? Where do Muslims sit? And they kind of explained to me, I suppose, where they saw it, you know, and it was a struggle for them because they were coming from very theological kind of biblical positions. And then I went to hear Steve Chuck in the Grosvenor Hall. Again, I was invited by my friend. I said, I shall go along and see what this fella has to say. And I really liked what he was saying because he came from the position that the Bible is a library of books, and also in terms of the Abrahamic faith, about the Muslim community, and I suppose and talked about the difficulties he faced from within his own community when he started articulating these issues. So suddenly I kind of thought, well, hang on, if you can hold that space and say without that superiority, then that's a space I feel I could hold. And also I thought, well, you know what, if I go for another religion as a way of engaging with God, I have to read some new big books from scratch. I said, at least I know a little bit about the Bible. I thought it might be a bit easier, so I thought I would stick with what I know. Yeah, and I'm very much still on it. And I think I got involved in All Souls Church, and that was a very deliberate decision because I thought, well, if I'm going to commit in some way and try and develop and learn something, then I want to do it in a place where being LGBT is not an issue. You know, I don't want to go anywhere where it's an issue at all, because that's not why I'm there. I'm there because I want to connect with God in some way. And I don't want to be judged in any respect or feel judged, you know, perceived or imagined or real. So I've chosen All Souls, which is a non-subscribing Presbyterian church. And, you know, so I kind of, that's where I started going, and I liked it. I liked the fact that it was liberal. I liked the fact that the readings were not always scriptural. They drew on other sources. I went and read the Westminster Confession of Faith because I felt, well, if I'm going to something that's non-subscribing, I should find out what I'm not subscribing to, which is my kind of thing. And I think I'm probably one of the few Catholics who's actually read the Westminster Confession of Faith. In fact, friends of mine have told me I'm probably one of the few, you know, Presbyterians. Most Presbyterians haven't read it. So I think All Souls has kind of given me a community, and I've really, you know, felt part of that community, and enjoyed kind of engagement and being able to be involved, you know, in All Souls as a community, and I suppose develop my faith perspective to some respect, but also to use it as a launch pad to engage in other things. So I would also now go to Spectrum, which is the LGBT kind of meeting, monthly meeting, facilitated in the Agape Centre in the Lisbon Road, facilitated by the Methodists, which is, and you feel really welcome there. I thought what I really like about Spectrum is, in that place, is that it's not just that they're renting out a room, that the members of that Methodist community are involved. They come and they give us tea and coffee, and they, you know, so I feel very welcome there, and I think that's really lovely. And I'm hearing there in that space, I'm hearing other voices, which I'm finding helpful from different perspectives, and I like hearing different perspectives because my perspective will always be transient. I will never have a fixed perspective. I will have, this is what I believe, and this is the best thinking I have on this right now. But somebody will say something, goes, oh wow, yeah, actually I've got it wrong, or that gives it a completely new dimension. And I think that's what I like about my faith journey. And I think what I have seen in other people's articulation of their faith in the public sphere is that their position is so fixed and so definitive. And for them to be right, I must be wrong. And I think that's the challenge for discourse around faith between the LGBT community and those who are allies, and the traditional Christian community have difficulties with that. Is that, you know, that right-wrong kind of idea. Whereas actually, why can't, we're all definitely wrong. There's no way, we're all definitely right. So that means by definition, we're all definitely wrong. It just means to what degree we are right or wrong. And I think that's what actually makes faith a journey and also keeps it interesting. What I read from the text, the gospel text, when I went back to them, very much essentially as a newcomer, and probably one of the most important, sentences was "God is love," and I think for me that's the starting point for everything. And if everything is framed within that, then you can always find a way. I struggle with churches who are so vociferous in terms of LGBT people and that we're wrong, we're sexually immoral, we're going to hell, and yet with such ease, I suppose, don't condemn the people who are parked in their car park on a Sunday driving £60,000 cars. Why aren't they saying actually you should be driving a £5,000 car and giving £55,000 to the poor? Because that's what it says. That's what it says in the Bible. Why aren't they condemning obesity? Why aren't they weighing people as they come in through the church, and saying actually I'm sorry, your BMI is too high. You're not fit to be a Christian. Because that's what they're doing in terms of when they're saying to me as an LGBT person that I'm not fit to be a Christian. But so I think I think churches really need to look at themselves in terms of the hierarchy of sin and why they have decided that my life, and it's not my lifestyle, it's my life, is in some way sinful. Certainly from my point of view, if being gay was the only sin I've ever committed, then I should be fast-tracked for sainthood. And I think for me also, it's about why is it a sin for me to be in a loving, committed relationship, with a person who I want to grow old with? Why is that in itself a sin? It's absolutely a sin when I disrespect my partner. It's absolutely a sin when I put myself first to her detriment. Those are sins. When I'm greedy, when I lie, they're sins within my relationship. But my relationship itself shouldn't be considered a sin. That's my perspective. And I hope that, I suppose, churches will really focus on what's important and what the gospel message is all about. And they say, well, what did Jesus say about homosexuality? He never mentioned it. And yet churches seem to be so hung up on it. And I still don't really understand why it's seen as such an issue, because the real issue for me in terms of Christianity and the narrative around LGBT people and being a danger and going to hell and being unnatural and being unbiblical and being sinful is that the outworking of that position is that LGBT people are self-harming. They're being medicated for depression. And many have taken their own lives directly as a result of that narrative discourse that the churches have articulated, and then has pervaded into wider society through politics and the media. So it seems to me the most un-Christian thing you could do is to say to somebody something that would cause them directly to take their own life. And I think churches really need to think about what's really important in terms of Jesus' message and focus, on the things that are really important. And actually, what I do in bed with my partner is not really important. And, drinking cups of tea and reading the newspaper and listening to the radio is not really important. So I think really churches should look at what's important and what's the centre of Jesus' message. I think the important thing about a resource like this is that a lot of people who have opinions on LGBT people have opinions based on stereotypes and imaginary people. And they haven't heard us because we've left those spaces. And when people have tried to articulate something in those spaces, it's been so hostile that they've never really heard the true, authentic voice. They've heard a plea, they've heard a cry for help, a cry for acceptance. So I think a resource like this will allow those voices, particularly directly in a faith context as opposed to a rights context, to be heard. And I think there are people, and I have met them, and I don't claim to be one of them, who are so committed to Jesus and living the life that, and being a true follower of Jesus and living that life and spreading that word, much more so than many of my heterosexual friends. And indeed, one of the things that I was involved in was a debate on marriage equality as part of an event. And I have friends of mine who have been together for 30 years, are not civil partnership, not even civilly partnered, and would like to wait till the law changes so they could get married and in a sacred space, in a church. And obviously that will be a church that's willing to do that. It won't be that anyone will be forced to do it. And I asked him, I says, why is it so important for you to get married in a church? Because it wouldn't be for me, particularly now that I'm already civilly partnered. And she said, because we want to put Jesus at the centre of our relationship. And I have never heard any heterosexual friends of mine articulate their want to get married in a church environment as that faithful. So I think those voices really need to be heard, and hopefully will maybe cause people to rethink, will inform people's thinking, and turn those imaginary people that they think that they understand actually into real people, and then a genuine response to a real person as opposed to a stereotype. The advice I would give my younger self is keep going, and as Lyra McKee said, it does get better. And probably, see that girl you met in the bar in 1992 and she asked you out, say no.